As much as this match means to you, Sonny, this belt right here means the exact...
I told you not to worry.
I can't stand him. Jerry Lawler said words like that more than once across his long career. He said them about rivals standing across the ring from him. He said them about voices on the radio and later on national television. Some of those words were part of the show, some of them were real. That mix of fact and fiction is part of what makes his story so hard to sum up in just one sentence, and it is exactly why his list of rivals still gets talked about today. He never hid from a fight. He seemed to look for one instead. That habit followed him his whole life. People remember the line. Fewer people remember everything standing behind it. That single sentence still tells fans exactly what kind of story this is going to be. Right now, Jerry Lawler is an older man, long past his days as a full-time wrestler. He is remembered fondly as the King of Memphis Wrestling, a nickname he earned and defended for decades. But his later years came with hard moments too. He survived a heart attack that happened live on national TV, in front of millions of stunned viewers. He later suffered a stroke that took away something most of us never think about, his ability to see color. He now sees the world only in black and white. That is a strange kind of symbol for a career that has never been simple, never fully one thing or the other. His fans loved him with real passion. Some of his rivals never fully forgave him, and it is fair to say he never fully forgave some of them either. If you want to understand professional wrestling in the American South and how it eventually grew into the biggest stages in the entire business, you need to understand the 10 men who tested Jerry Lawler the most in the ring, backstage, and sometimes even in a courtroom. Fans still call him a legend today, but legends carry weight too. His weight came from every name on this list. A stroke does not care about titles or belts. It changes a life all the same, no matter how famous that life once was. He built a career on being unbreakable in front of a crowd. Time eventually breaks everyone anyway, kings included. Before we go any further, if you are enjoying this kind of deep dive into wrestling history, take a second and use the hype feature to give this video some hype. It genuinely helps more people discover stories like this one. Stories about fear, respect, rivalry, and the price of being called a king for as long as Lawler was. It only takes a second. It helps keep stories like this one alive for other fans to find. Jerry Lawler's story begins in Memphis, Tennessee, a city that became one of the beating hearts of professional wrestling long before anyone called it sports entertainment. In the 1970s and 1980s, wrestling was not one single company running the whole country. It was broken up into territories, each one with its own champion, its own weekly storylines, and its own loyal local fan base. Memphis stood out as one of the most famous and most respected territories anywhere in the nation. The promotion changed names a few times over the years. Most fans remember it best as the CWA, and later as the USWA, but through every name change, one man stayed at the center of it all. That structure shaped everything about how wrestling worked back then. It shaped every match, every promo, and every rivalry that came out of it. Wrestlers today rarely work under a system like that one. It shaped every choice Lawler made as both a performer and a boss. Jerry Lawler was never just the top star of Memphis wrestling. He was also one of the people steering the ship from behind the scenes. Working alongside his partner Jerry Jarrett, Lawler helped book the matches, plan the storylines, and shape the direction of the entire territory. Every single Monday night, without fail, fans packed into the Mid-South Coliseum to see him fight. To keep that crowd coming back week after week, year after year, the shows needed real heat, real tension, and real believability. Fans needed to feel deep down that these men genuinely hated each other, even if a part of them suspected it might be a show. He learned to think like a promoter as much as a performer. That mindset never really left him, even decades later. Booking decisions were not made in an office far away. They were made by men who also had to step into the ring themselves that same night. That kind of pressure meant Lawler could not simply wrestle safe, predictable matches with tidy finishes. He had to step into the ring again and again with big, unpredictable, sometimes frightening opponents. Some of these men were seasoned professionals who understood exactly how to make a fight look dangerous without real danger involved. Others were far less controlled, far less predictable, and far more willing to blur the line between performance and reality. A booker sitting in Lawler's position had to manage two kinds of fear at once. The fake fear fans felt watching from their seats, and the very real fear that sometimes crept in backstage. If Lawler ever looked weak in front of a hometown crowd, Or if he ever turned down a chance to face a dangerous performer, ticket sales could suffer fast, and the whole territory could feel it. Fear was part of the business, so was trust. Lawler had to manage both at the same time, night after night. A promoter could lose a whole territory over one bad decision. Lawler understood that risk better than almost anyone else in Memphis. Every choice about who to trust in that ring carried real weight on his body and on the box office. This constant pressure shaped Lawler into a competitor who welcomed conflict, on camera, and, more than a few times, off camera as well. Some of his biggest rivals arrived as traveling champions, sent through Memphis to test his in-ring skill against the best the business had to offer. Some were wild, unpredictable brawlers, capable of truly hurting him if a match ever slipped out of control. Others were simply men fighting for the exact same spot at the top of the card that Lawler wanted for himself, year after year. Out of every single rivalry Lawler built across 5 decades in the business, 10 stand out as the ones that shaped both his career and his lasting reputation the most. That is the deal every top star in that era had to make. Lawler made it again and again. For years, some performers avoided that kind of pressure entirely. Lawler built his entire career around walking straight into it instead. That readiness became part of his identity. Fans expected it. So did every promoter who ever booked him. One of the strangest rivalries in the history of professional wrestling did not start with a wrestler at all. It started with a comedian. Andy Kaufman was already a household name from TV before he ever set foot inside a wrestling ring. He wanted to revive an old carnival style of wrestling villain, the kind of heel who challenges ordinary people right out of the crowd. Kaufman called himself the intergender champion of the world. He challenged women in the audience to wrestle him for cash prizes, and in doing so, he openly mocked the idea that Southern wrestling was a tough, serious, respectable sport. Some of these 10 men became legends because of Lawler. A few of them made Lawler a legend right back. That list did not form by accident. Each name on it represents a different kind of test Lawler had to pass. 10 names, 10 different tests, one single career built out of all of them together. When Kaufman brought this strange act directly into Lawler's own home territory, Lawler treated it like a genuine threat to everything he had spent years building. On April 5, 1982, the two of them finally faced off inside the ring in front of a packed, roaring crowd at the Mid-South Coliseum. Lawler struck Kaufman with 2 devastating piledrivers. Kaufman ended up in the hospital with what looked like a serious neck injury. To anyone watching, it did not look like a joke at all. It looked genuinely brutal, almost too real for comfort. It sounds almost unbelievable today. At the time, it worked exactly the way Kaufman and Lawler hoped it would. Wrestling in the 1980s did not usually cross over into mainstream comedy. This rivalry became the exception that everyone remembers. The whole angle relied on total secrecy. One slip in front of the wrong reporter could have ended it early. The feud grew even larger a few months later, spilling out of the wrestling world entirely. On July 29, 1982, both men appeared together on the Late Night with David Letterman show. Right there on national television, Lawler slapped Kaufman clean out of his chair. Kaufman shouted back at him, cursing without holding anything back. In a moment that felt completely unscripted and utterly unplanned to millions of viewers at home. People across the entire country talked about that clip for weeks, unsure whether they had just watched something real or something staged. Nobody in the crowd that night thought it was a performance. That was the entire point of the angle. Kaufman was already rich and famous before he ever stepped into a wrestling ring. He did not need the attention. He wanted it anyway. Wrestling had rarely touched mainstream comedy before this. It never looked the same again. Years later, the film Man on the Moon finally revealed the full truth. Kaufman and Lawler had planned the whole feud together from the very beginning, as an elaborate piece of performance art. The two men were close friends behind the scenes the entire time. Even so, keeping that secret buried for years took real discipline and real sacrifice from both of them. Kaufman reportedly received hate mail from fans who genuinely believed he had lost his mind chasing this strange wrestling gimmick. When Kaufman passed away in 1984, Lawler still kept the joke alive publicly, delivering a dry, in-character response on television instead of breaking from the act, even in the face of his friend's death. It remains one of the most celebrated and talked about angles in wrestling history, and it shows just how far Lawler was willing to go to protect the illusion that his sport was real, no matter the personal cost. Television had never quite seen anything like it. The line between comedy and violence had almost disappeared completely. Some fans cheered. Many more were simply confused, unsure whether to laugh or be angry at what they had just watched. While Kaufman tested Lawler's ability to protect his own reputation, Nick Bockwinkel tested something different: his hunger to be recognized as a true world champion beyond the borders of Memphis. Bockwinkel held the AWA World Heavyweight title, one of the most respected championships in the country outside of Memphis wrestling. In 1982, Lawler challenged him in a series of hard-fought, deeply technical matches. Bockwinkel wrestled a smart, patient, almost intellectual style, built specifically to protect his title against hungry regional challengers like Lawler. Kaufman never once broke character in public, not even under pressure. Lawler matched that same discipline for years afterward. Letterman's show reached a much wider audience than wrestling usually did on its own. That exposure changed how people outside the sport saw Lawler. At one point during this rivalry, it genuinely looked like Lawler had finally captured the world title from him in the ring. Then the decision was overturned, thanks to interference from none other than Andy Kaufman, cleverly tied into the ongoing angle between the two of them. For Lawler, this moment represented far more than a single overturned match. It represented the constant, frustrating struggle of a regional star trying to earn national respect, only to be blocked again by the quiet politics of bigger promotions protecting their own traveling champions from clean losses. It is still studied by wrestling historians today. Few angles in the business ever blended comedy and violence so completely. Few performers could keep a secret like that one for so long. Fewer still would have kept it going after a friend's death. That same hunger for outside respect had already shown up years earlier, in his rivalry with superstar Billy Graham. Graham was a larger-than-life character, instantly recognizable for his enormous muscles and his flashy, confident personality. He had been a major champion in a national promotion before ever coming through Memphis. On November 12, 1979, Lawler defeated Graham to capture the CWA World Championship in front of an electric hometown crowd. This was a genuinely huge moment for Memphis wrestling, since it proved beyond doubt that the local promotion could stand toe-to-toe with the bigger national companies. Graham fought hard to protect his own reputation throughout the feud, pushing Lawler into physical, hard-hitting matches designed to make sure the title change felt earned, not simply handed over for the sake of a hometown celebration. National titles carried a different kind of weight than local ones. Lawler wanted that weight for himself. Bockwinkel did not travel through Memphis to lose. He came through to prove that his title still meant something everywhere it went. Every match against a traveling champion doubled as an audition for something bigger. Whether the audience realized it or not every rival tested Lawler's pride or his ambition. Some tested his nerve, his patience, and his personal safety. Jos LeDuc was one of the most frightening men Lawler ever stepped into a ring with during his entire career. LeDuc built his fearsome reputation on being wildly unpredictable and on seeming almost genuinely dangerous rather than simply tough. In the ring itself, LeDuc wrestled a stiff, uncompromising style, showing little interest in making things easy or comfortable for his opponent. Lawler had to treat every single match against LeDuc almost like a genuine fight for survival, never fully certain what the big man might do next once the bell rang. Politics like this frustrated plenty of regional stars, not just Lawler. Few of them fought back as hard as he did. Interference like that could make a crowd erupt in anger. It also kept the story alive for another night, another town, another rematch. A title match decided by outside interference rarely satisfies anyone completely, winner or loser. Bruiser Brody brought a similar kind of fear into the ring, though it came from a completely different direction. Brody never truly belonged to any single promotion. Instead, he traveled from territory to territory, building a fierce reputation as a dangerous outsider who answered to no one. He would walk to the ring swinging a heavy steel chain, sometimes frighteningly close to fans packed along the aisle, always stirring up nervous, uneasy energy throughout the crowd. Brody was infamous across the entire industry for refusing to follow a planned finish if he ever felt disrespected or underpaid by a promoter. For Lawler, sharing a ring with Brody meant constantly managing real uncomfortable uncertainty, since Brody possessed both the size and the legitimate fighting skill to make almost any opponent look small the moment he decided to go into business for himself. Graham knew how to protect his spot. Lawler had to earn every inch of ground he gained that year. A title win in front of a hometown crowd carries its own kind of pressure. Lawler felt every bit of it that night in 1979. Every hometown win came with its own quiet cost, paid back later in bruises and long nights on the road. Terry Funk brought yet another kind of danger into Lawler's life, one built on raw, unfiltered violence rather than pure unpredictability. In 1981, Funk feuded with Lawler across a series of brutal, bloody matches that shocked even seasoned wrestling fans. Their most famous encounter together was an empty arena match held at the Mid-South Coliseum, filmed with no live crowd watching, leaving nothing but the raw, unsettling sounds of real physical violence for the cameras to capture. During that match, Funk swung a broken wooden board directly toward Lawler's face, coming frighteningly close to seriously injuring his eye for good. Lawler partially blocked the blow, but the moment still left behind real damage and real blood on camera. It became one of the most talked about hardcore brawls of that entire era, and it showed just how far performers were willing to push themselves to make Memphis wrestling feel genuinely dangerous to the people watching at home. Some men in wrestling win with skill alone. LeDuc won with fear, and Lawler had to find a way through it. Most wrestlers know exactly how far a match is supposed to go. LeDuc never gave that same guarantee to anyone he faced. There was no safe way to relax across the ring from a man like that, not even for a single moment. More than a decade later, Lawler faced a similar wave of chaos, this time from the Moondogs, a tag team known to fans as Spike and Cujo. Throughout 1992 and 1993, Lawler and his partner Jeff Jarrett fought the Moondogs across a long series of wild, weapon-filled matches that pushed the boundaries of the hardcore style even further. Garbage cans, thick steel chains, and splintered wooden chairs all became regular parts of the show. The feud was eventually voted Feud of the Year by Pro Wrestling Illustrated back in 1992, a genuine badge of honor within the industry. Working through matches like these took a real, lasting physical toll on Lawler's body, leaving him with real soreness and a complicated relationship with the very hardcore style that fans in Memphis loved so passionately. Brody trusted almost no one in the business. Lawler had to earn whatever small trust Brody was willing to give. A chain swinging through a crowd is not a normal wrestling entrance. It was normal for Brody, and everyone around him learned to expect it. Nobody in that territory truly relaxed when Brody's name went up on the card. Inside the walls of Memphis itself, Lawler's most complicated and longest-running rivalry may have been with Bill Dundee. For more than 20 years, the two men stood as the twin pillars holding up the entire CWA promotion. They traded championships back and forth constantly, and fought in countless get-out-of-town matches, a stipulation where the loser had to leave the territory entirely for a set period of time. These matches drew enormous local crowds, because fans truly believed the competition between the two men was completely real. Behind the scenes, both men wanted creative control over the product, and both wanted top billing on every single card. Their rivalry was never only about who could win inside the ring. It was also, quietly, about who would ultimately shape the creative direction of the entire territory they both called home. Funk pushed the line further than almost anyone else Lawler ever faced. The bruises from that match lasted for weeks. Empty arena matches strip away the noise of the crowd completely. All that is left is the sound of two men actually hitting each other. Blood on camera was rare even in that rough era. This match delivered it in a way fans never forgot. Harley Race tested Lawler in an entirely different way than any of these men. Race held the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, one of the single most respected titles anywhere in the sport during that era. Across the industry, Race was known as one of the toughest, most legitimate competitors working anywhere in wrestling. When he defended his title in Memphis during the late 1970s, he wrestled Lawler with real, uncompromising stiffness, testing whether the beloved local hero could truly hold his own against a genuine national champion. Lawler came away with deep respect for Race, but their matches also left him with real bruises and a clear, humbling understanding of just how hard it truly was to earn respect outside the comfort of his own home territory. Weapons like these were not props. They were real objects, swung with real force night after night. A tag team built around chaos does not need much of a script. The Moondogs proved that again and again across 2 full years. Fans who loved that style rarely stopped to think about the toll it took behind the scenes. The biggest national spotlight of Lawler's entire career arrived through his rivalry with Bret Hart. When Lawler finally joined the World Wrestling Federation in 1992, he quickly set his sights on Hart, one of the promotion's brightest and most respected stars. Their feud officially began at the 1993 King of the Ring pay-per-view, when Lawler attacked Hart during his coronation ceremony as the newly crowned King of the Ring. What followed became one of the most deeply personal rivalries of that entire era in wrestling. Lawler used his sharp microphone skills to mock Hart's elderly parents, Stu and Helen Hart, repeatedly bringing up their age and their health, right there on national television. Dundee was not just a rival. For years, he was also a mirror, showing Lawler exactly what he had to beat. Two stars sharing one spotlight rarely stay friendly forever. Lawler and Dundee proved that for over 20 years running, creative control was never written down on paper between them. It was fought for, quietly, year after year. The feud drew strong ratings and produced some genuinely excellent matches between two skilled performers, but the insults themselves cut deep. Reports at the time suggested the Hart family did not take the personal comments lightly at all, and for a while, the line separating a scripted rivalry from real, lingering tension became difficult for anyone to see clearly. Eventually, over time, Lawler and Hart settled their differences, but their feud still stands today as one of the most talked about examples of just how personal a wrestling storyline could realistically become. Race did not care about hometown crowds. He cared about respect, and he made Lawler earn it the hard way. A title defense in a smaller territory could feel like a formality to some champions. Race never once treated it that way. Respect in wrestling is not given for free. Race made sure Lawler understood that lesson clearly. As professional wrestling slowly moved away from scattered regional territories and into one connected national business, the very nature of Lawler's conflicts began to change alongside it. The physical dangers that defined his territorial years slowly gave way to a newer kind of battle. One fought through words, cameras, headlines, and corporate politics rather than fists. Hart never asked for that kind of attention on his family. Lawler gave it to him anyway. Microphone skills can build a career. They can also do lasting damage if they are pointed at the wrong target. In 1999, one of the most shocking moments in the history of Southern wrestling unfolded live on a broadcast of Power Pro Wrestling. Doug Gilbert, the brother of the respected booker Eddie Gilbert, suddenly broke completely away from the planned script during a segment. He accused a local promoter of serious wrongdoing in front of the cameras, then turned his full attention directly toward Lawler, bringing up Lawler's real-life legal troubles from years earlier in front of a stunned national audience. The broadcast caused serious, lasting damage to the promotion's working relationship with the World Wrestling Federation, and it created a bitter, permanent rift between Lawler and the entire Gilbert family. Wrestling fans still debate how much of that feud was real. Both men eventually moved past it, in their own way. A rivalry built on real families rarely stays purely fictional for long. This one blurred that line more than most. Insults aimed at a wrestler's own body are one thing. Insults aimed at their parents are something else entirely. Those legal troubles Gilbert referenced that night dated back to 1993. Lawler had been accused of a serious crime involving a teenage girl. The original charge was eventually dropped after the accuser changed her account of events, but the legal proceedings still led to real, lasting consequences for Lawler. He ultimately pleaded to a lesser charge connected to contacting witnesses involved in the case. Whatever the full truth of that difficult chapter turned out to be, it followed Lawler for the rest of his public life, and it clearly shaped how some fans, and some fellow wrestlers, viewed him from that point forward. The business itself was shifting under everyone's feet. Lawler shifted along with it, whether he wanted to or not. The territory system had lasted for decades. Once it started to fall apart, it did not come back. New stars entering that shifting landscape rarely understood what the old territory system had actually demanded of its top performers. Years later, that same difficult history resurfaced in an unexpected way, live on national TV once again. During a broadcast of Monday Night Raw, WWE performer AJ Lee made a sharp, pointed comment aimed directly at Lawler while on commentary, referencing his age and his complicated past. Lawler reacted with visible, audible anger in the moment, and reports later suggested he fired back at her privately once the cameras stopped rolling. It was a small moment in the grand scheme of his career, but it showed clearly how a difficult chapter from decades earlier could still follow him into an entirely modern broadcast, ready to resurface at almost any time. Gilbert only needed a few unscripted minutes. Those minutes followed Lawler for years afterward. Live television leaves no room for a second take. Whatever Gilbert said that night could never be quietly taken back. Wrestling promoters learned quickly that live microphones carry real risk along with real reward. Perhaps the single most heavily criticized program of Lawler's later career arrived in 2010 and 2011. When he found himself feuding with his own broadcast partner, Michael Cole. Cole, playing an obnoxious on-air heel character, spent months mocking Lawler's age, his health struggles, and his family, including the painful loss of his own son. The rivalry eventually led to a singles match at WrestleMania XXV, and later a Kiss My Foot match at the Over the Limit event, where Cole ended up thoroughly covered in barbecue sauce for the crowd's amusement. Many longtime fans felt genuinely uncomfortable watching a respected veteran get worked over physically by a broadcaster with little real in-ring experience of his own. Court cases like this rarely stay quiet for long. This one followed Lawler for the rest of his public life. A plea deal does not erase a headline. It just changes exactly what the headline says. That uncomfortable feud found an unplanned, genuinely emotional resolution just over a year later. On September 10, 2012, Lawler suffered a frightening cardiac arrest live during a broadcast of Monday Night Raw. Cole stayed remarkably calm and professional on the air throughout the ordeal, helping guide viewers through a genuinely terrifying moment for fans who had no idea whether Lawler would survive the night. That real-life medical crisis effectively ended their entire on-screen rivalry for good, and it led afterward to a genuine, lasting reconciliation between the two broadcast partners. Old headlines have a way of returning at the worst possible moment. This was one of those moments for Lawler. A single sentence on live television can undo years of careful image building. Lawler learned that firsthand. Lawler's long simmering tension with Paul Heyman traced back even further to sharp creative disagreements over the direction of ECW in the early 1990s. Eddie Gilbert had originally hoped to build that young promotion around the same traditional Southern-style Lawler had helped popularize back in Memphis. When Paul Heyman took over creative control instead, he pushed ECW in a much harder, more extreme direction, built around entirely different values and a very different audience. That fundamental disagreement created lasting professional friction between Lawler and Heyman, friction that carried forward into their occasional crossovers together years later. Cole was not a wrestler. He did not need to be one to get under Lawler's skin. Mocking a person's family crosses a different line than mocking their in-ring skill. Cole crossed that line for months. Months of scripted mockery can feel very different once real health problems enter the story alongside it. Around that very same time, back in 1991, Lawler had actually been in serious talks to join World Championship Wrestling, with real plans in place to win a major world title. That whole deal ultimately fell apart, reportedly after private booking plans were leaked out to wrestling newsletters ahead of schedule. It quietly closed off a path that might have given Lawler a nationally recognized world championship, and it left him with lingering frustration about how business decisions were truly made at that higher level of the sport. Real fear looks different from scripted fear. Fans watching at home could tell the difference immediately. A near-death moment on live television changes how an audience sees everyone involved, not just the man in danger. Lawler also clashed directly with Vince McMahon over something less physical, yet still deeply personal to him: the trademark rights to his own nickname. When the WWF began using the name The King for other performers on their roster, Lawler filed a formal lawsuit to protect a name he felt truly belonged to him. The two sides eventually settled the entire matter once Lawler signed with the company in 1992, but the lawsuit still proved that Lawler was fully willing to fight through legal channels not only inside the ring, to protect what he genuinely believed was his. Some rivalries end with a handshake. This one ended with a hospital bed and a long recovery. ECW eventually became one of the most influential promotions in wrestling history. Lawler watched that happen from the outside, with mixed feelings. A handful of other moments added further weight to this complicated later chapter of his long career. His backstage friction with Owen Hart over booking decisions stood in painful, striking contrast to the tragic night in 1999, when Lawler had to comfort Owen at ringside following a fatal accident during a pay-per-view broadcast. His brief, physically intense program with a returning Ultimate Warrior in 1996 included Lawler smashing a framed picture directly over Warrior's head, leading to a stiff, visibly tense match between the two performers. Even decades earlier, back in 1977, his rivalry with a young Paul Orndorff tested Lawler against a rising former football star, hungry and determined to prove himself on his way toward national stardom. Business disagreements like this rarely stay simple. This one carried real resentment for years afterward. A leaked plan cannot be unleaked. Once it reached the newsletters, the damage to those negotiations was already done. A title shot that never happens still shapes a career in its own quiet way, long after the fact. Looking back across this entire list, a clear and consistent pattern begins to emerge. During the territory years, Lawler's conflicts were mostly physical in nature. Dangerous, unpredictable men like Brody, LeDuc, and Funk forced him to prove his toughness again and again, night after night, town after town, arena after arena. As wrestling grew into a connected national business, the shape of these conflicts changed considerably. They became less about fists and more about words, public image, and lasting reputation. Michael Cole never threw a single real punch at Lawler, yet the feud still cut deep in its own uncomfortable way. Doug Gilbert never wrestled Lawler even once, yet one unscripted promo caused more lasting damage than most physical matches ever could. Lost opportunities like this stay with a performer. Lawler carried this one quietly for a long time. Trademarks rarely feel personal to outsiders. To the man whose name is on the line, they feel personal enough to fight for in court. Through every single version of this business, across 5 decades of change, Jerry Lawler somehow found a way to keep going. He survived brutal in-ring battles that could easily have ended his career early. He survived personal scandal that could have ended his career in a very different, far more painful way. He survived the sharp personal insults of the modern corporate era. And he survived a serious health scare that very nearly took his life. Live in front of millions of viewers. A name might seem like a small thing to protect. To Lawler, it was worth fighting for in court. Ringside is supposed to be a safe distance from real danger. That night in 1999, it was not. None of this means his story is simple, or perfectly clean, or easy to sum up. Some of these rivals pushed him because the business itself demanded real conflict to survive. Some of them exposed genuine flaws and real controversy that Lawler eventually had to answer for publicly. Both of these things can be true at exactly the same time. And that uneasy mix is part of what makes his career so genuinely worth studying closely, even today. Not every rivalry on this list involved a title or a script. Some of them were simply personal. A young performer with something to prove can push even a veteran harder than expected. Orndorff was exactly that kind of performer in 1977. Jerry Lawler earned the nickname The King through decades of real conflict. Some of it carefully staged for the cameras, some of it painfully real behind closed doors. The long list of men he never quite forgave, and the ones who may have never fully forgiven him, either tells the larger story of an entire industry built on tension at every single level, from small regional arenas in Tennessee to the biggest stages the sport has ever known. Whatever you personally think of the man behind that crown, his story remains one of the most complete records we have of how professional wrestling truly changed, decade after decade, rivalry after rivalry, right up to the black and white world he sees today. Every era leaves its own kind of mark. Lawler carries marks from every single one of them. His crown was real, and so was the heavy cost of wearing it for so many very long decades.